The neon haze of the Las Vegas Strip pulsed behind the Hilton stage door as Elvis Presley, 40, world-weary, cloaked in sequins, prepared to deliver another flawless set. Across the wings, a nervous whisper rippled through the crew. "They say Ozzy Osbourne's here." Ozzy, 27, leather-clad and raw, had been handed a backstage pass. He believed it was a handshake invitation to witness the king in his final act. But when Ozzy stepped into that golden spotlight, unannounced, at the wrong moment, the crowd froze. Elvis, mid-ballad, halted on the high note, eyes locking with a stranger who looked more like a charging bull than a humble fan. Behind them, the band faltered. Front-row faces flipped from adoration to confusion. On that stage, two icons met not in harmony, but in electric standoff. One demanding respect for his kingdom, the other driven by reckless admiration. It was a collision of eras. Rock and roll's gracious monarch versus metal's prophetic outcast. And by the time the last chord quivered in the hungover hush, no one in that showroom would ever forget how the king and the prince of darkness faced off, before the music could forgive them both. The hot October sun melted into a neon haze the moment Black Sabbath's tour bus rolled off the freeway and into the glittering sprawl of Las Vegas. Ozzy Osbourne, freshly turned 27, pressed his forehead against the tinted window, watching the city's electrical heartbeat pulse through the dusk. He'd toured the Midwest, burned out arenas in Chicago and Detroit, yet nothing had prepared him for the intensity of the Strip. The riot of colors, the smell of casino smoke and spilled cocktails, the sense that every surface throbbed with possibility. By midnight, Sabbath's five-piece had checked into the Hilton International, the same hotel where Elvis Presley's famous residency was winding down. Ozzy's manager, Reg Thompson, a wiry man with wire-rimmed glasses and an encyclopedic knowledge of every promoter's cell number, slipped into lounge where Sabbath sat, nursing bottled water and tuning guitars. "Ozzy," Reg whispered, leaning close so only the front man could hear. "I ran into a guy on the loading dock. Big guy. Security for Mr. Presley. Said, if you want to slip backstage during Elvis's show tomorrow, no cameras. It's arranged. Handshake deal. But keep it quiet." Ozzy's heart stumbled. He'd grown up worshipping Presley. His mother had played Heartbreak Hotel in the kitchen while making dinner. Yet here he was, a hired gun of dark riffs and guttural howls, planning to intrude on the king's domain. Still, the thrill of the forbidden outweighed his hesitation. He nodded once, grim and eager. "Let's do it." The next evening, the lobby of the Hilton throbbed with cocktail-tipped crowds in rhinestone suits and sequined gowns, champagne flutes clinking beneath mirrored columns. Ozzy moved through the swirl wearing black leather and metal studs, ears straining for the telltale strains of Elvis's band warming up. A tall man in a crisp white shirt and dark tie met him by the elevators. No badge, but a rigid posture that said authority. "You Ozzy?" the guard asked, voice low. He studied Ozzy's painted face and long hair, then looked him up and down. "You're probably lost." "Reg said I could come back," Ozzy replied, pressing the note in his pocket like a talisman. "I'm here for Presley's show." The guard's jaw clenched. He glanced at the mirrored wall as if weighing the possibility that someone was watching. Then he shook his head, stepped aside, and pressed the service button. "Follow me, and don't cause trouble." Ozzy followed, adrenaline pinballing through him. The guard led him through a labyrinth of catering doors, staff pantries, and narrow corridors, each turn tightening the hush, until the distant roar of an audience seeped through steel-reinforced walls. At a heavy, unmarked door, the guard paused. "Through here, straight, then left," You'll find the VIP entrance to the showroom. Keep it to yourself." With a curt nod, Ozzy slipped inside. The fanfare of the audience swelled as he crept toward the stage's wing, heart pounding like a runaway drum solo. On stage, Elvis Presley stood at 40, his once effortless swagger now laced with fatigue. He'd just begun "Bridge Over Troubled Water," chords echoing across the gilded auditorium, when something in the corner of his eye, movement beyond the footlights, caught his attention. His voice faltered on the high note as a dark figure stepped into the beam. Ozzy, entirely believing his backstage pass was sufficient, climbed the shallow stairs onto the platform, believing this intrusion would be his great moment of rock and roll communion. He raised an arm, ready to salute, the gesture of a fan-turned-brother in the craft. The band hesitated, and the audience, upon noticing the stranger, fell into a stunned hush. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the snare drum's quiet thump. Then Elvis lowered his microphone and stared. "Son," Presley's voice was velvet calm, but bore an unmistakable steel. "I don't know who you are, but you don't crash my stage." The silence widened, 15,000 people suspended between shock and tension. Ozzy froze, the spotlight burning his skin. His black-studded boots anchored him to the boards. Around him, the orchestra guitarist swallowed. The pianist kept his gaze on sheet music. No one moved. Ozzy opened his mouth, fumbling for a word. I thought I was invited." "By whom?" Elvis demanded, stepping forward as the band violinist raised an eyebrow. The audience leaned in, eager for the confrontation. Before Ozzy could spin out an explanation, two burly security men emerged from the wings. They grasped his arms and began to steer him away from the stunned king of rock and roll. The crowd murmured. Some booed, some cheered for the guard's promptness. Most simply watched, eyes wide as history collided on stage. Elvis watched Ozzy's retreat, then turned back to the microphone. His throat rattled on the next lyric, the intimate tale of love and loss crackling with fresh tension. When the final note faded, his voice carried a richer timbre, touched by the confusion and regret of the moment. Back in his dressing room, Ozzy paced, adrenaline giving way to shame. He could hear the muffled applause resuming through the curtained door. He replayed Presley's words, tasted the metallic edge of humiliation. He just wanted to share the stage with his hero, not become its unwelcome guest. Reg burst in, breathing hard. "What happened? I thought they said you could—" "I crashed the wrong party," Ozzy snapped, slamming his fist on a cluttered table. Guitars leaned against the wall like silent judges. He sank onto a stool and buried his face in his hands, the echo of Presley's calm authority still ringing in his ears. Reg sank beside him, voice gentle. "We'll fix this. Elvis won't let you hang like this all night." "But he hates me now," Ozzy mumbled. He sounded pissed. Reg placed a hand on Ozzy's shoulder. "You'll apologize. You'll make it right. And one day you'll laugh about this. You'll see." Ozzy looked up, eyes red. He didn't feel like laughing. He felt small, like a child caught behind the curtain of greatness. Outside, the Vegas lights shimmered, oblivious to the drama playing out inside. Tonight, the king had reclaimed his throne, and Ozzy, falling from his own dark kingdom, wondered if music's greatest fans could ever step fully into its brightest moments. The moment "You Gave Me a Mountain" should have been a soaring testament to redemption. Elvis Presley found himself staring down an uninvited interloper. The Hilton showroom, a gilded expanse of cracked velvet seats and crystal chandeliers, echoed his voice, each syllable trembling with the promise of catharsis. But as he reached the final high note, a shifting ripple in the bright footlights drew his gaze toward the stage's upstage wing. There, framed in a hard beam of white, stood a lean figure in black leather and metal studs. Ozzy Osbourne, eyes wild, hair lacquered into a dark curtain, looked every bit the embodiment of heavy turmoil. He clutched a microphone stand as if it were an oar in treacherous waters. Behind him, the polished mahogany of Elvis's band paused in mid-strum. The song's backing track fell into dissonant silence. Elvis's breath caught. The audience of 2,000 hushed, the only sound a muted hiss of cigarette ash drifting to the floor. Faintly, someone coughed. Somewhere near the back, a woman whistled, uncertain whether to cheer or flee. Elvis kept his voice measured, but the velvet in it was gone. Only steel remained. "Son," he called, stepping forward until the edge of the stage trembled under his boots. "I don't know who you are." He paused, lips tightening. "But you don't crash my stage." The words struck like a struck cymbal, punctuating the blank space between them. Ozzy's jaw clenched, his pale face flickered with confusion and something sharper, an ember of defiance. He opened his mouth, swallowed hard, and tried to speak. I thought I had permission." A hulking security guard moved in, placing a heavy hand on Ozzy's shoulder. The sudden grip sparked a flicker of panic in Ozzy's eyes. He stepped back, the mic slipping from his fingers with a hollow thud that reverberated across the marble floor. "Elvis!" Ozzy tried again, voice strained by the concert's roar that had macerated into stunned silence. "Reg said—" The guard steered him toward the side wing, away from the kingly glare. With each step, Ozzy's boots clicked against the riser, a metronome counting down the seconds of his abrupt descent. He shot one last look at Elvis, hurt and pleading, before disappearing behind the shimmering gold curtain. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The orchestra guitarist's fingers trembled on a suspended chord. The drummer's sticks paused mere inches from the drums. Then, as if the hush had grown too heavy to bear, the house lights dimmed and the band exhaled back into life. Elvis raised his hand, an imperious yet weary gesture, and the song picked up exactly where it left off. But the melody carried an unfamiliar edge of tension, like a once placid lake stirred by a sudden wind. In the stalls, a ripple of applause broke out, some for the king's composure, some in relief that the spectacle resumed. Yet, beneath the cheers, a question chattered through the crowd. Who was that dark stranger? And what did his intrusion mean for the king's carefully controlled domain? Backstage, Ozzy's pulse pounded against his skull. He was thrust through a narrow corridor, walls humming with muffled chords and earpiece feedback. Another guard shoved him into a small anteroom, where Vince, Sabbath's roadie, was waiting. "What the hell, man?" Vince hissed, pulling Ozzy into a corner. "You almost got yourself trampled or arrested." Ozzy ran a hand through his hair, face pale beneath the grime of tour life. I thought it was okay," he stammered. "Reg said Elvis gave the nod." Vince's face hardened. "Reg said a lot of things, but no one mentions crashing the stage. You embarrassed yourself, and, possibly, the king." Ozzy's chest heaved, his heartbeat a storm against his ribs. "I didn't mean disrespect. I wanted to be there, with him." Vince shook his head. "You're a guest in his world, not a conqueror. You crossed a line." Ozzy closed his eyes, the memory of Elvis's cool reprimand echoing in his mind. He felt smaller than ever, not the fearless frontman, but a young boy whose greatest hero had just told him to step off. Down the corridor, the distant swell of applause reached them, a warped comfort, the world moving on as if no breach of protocol had occurred. Ozzy's reflection in a narrow mirror caught his eye. The pale, haunted face of a man who'd tasted glory, only to stumble in its glow. When the show ended and the spectators poured out into the neon night, Ozzy remained in the hush of backstage halls. The clang of metal doors and the snap of walkie-talkies formed a jagged soundtrack to his shame. He reached into his pocket and stroked the folded note Reg had given him, now a worthless scrap of paper. He let it fall to the floor, soles scuffing it into the dust. Tonight, the king had reclaimed his throne, and Ozzy Osbourne, for all his swagger and roar, found himself cast out into the quiet, left only with the reverberations of a lesson he would never forget. The last echoes of Bridge Over Troubled Water still lingered in the Hilton showroom when Elvis Presley stepped off stage, his white jumpsuit shimmering under the fading footlights. Backstage corridors, normally humming with after-show chatter and the clink of glasses, lay unnaturally quiet. Elvis's shoulders sagged as he padded down the narrow hallway, the endless parade of glittering mirrors offering nothing but his own weary reflection. He'd sung enough songs that night to coax toddlers from their cribs and stir the hearts of hardened gamblers, but his voice had cracked on the sharp edge of surprise when that stranger had bounded onto his stage. A burly security captain met him just past the swing door. His crisp suit and lean frame contrasted with the rumpled fatigue visible in Presley's stance. "Sir," the captain said, voice hushed as if afraid to wake the walls themselves, "that man, he wasn't in the roster. He was up on your stage." Elvis stopped, eyes narrowing. "Who was he?" he asked, tone calm but with an undercurrent of steel. He'd always maintained control over every element of his show, from the color of the drapes to the exact number of dancers. Tonight, someone had breached the fortress he'd built around his act. The captain raised an eyebrow. "Name's Osbourne, Ozzy Osbourne, lead singer of a band called Black Sabbath. He's here for your run." Elvis felt a cold rush of memory. Himself at 20, skinny and cocky, bursting onto stages in Memphis with nothing but a guitar strap and a dream. He recalled the frantic joy of those early nights, the electric fear of carving out a name in a world that didn't know whether to cheer or boo. A pang of something like regret twisted in his chest. "Black Sabbath," he murmured, voice softer now. "That darker stuff. They're the ones shouting about war and death and all that gloom." The security captain nodded. "He said Reg Thompson arranged a backstage pass. Thought you'd know him. But it seems wires got crossed." Elvis turned away, fingers grazing the satin curtain, as if testing the texture of his own disillusion. Scenes from the on-stage confrontation flickered through his mind. The way Ozzy's wild eyes had locked onto him. The guttural howl of the microphone dropping with a metallic clatter. The hush that followed. The showroom holding its breath as two different worlds collided. It had felt like a theft, an assault on everything he'd worked to perfect. He drew a slow breath, exhaling through clenched teeth. "He's young," he said quietly. "He probably thought it'd be some kind of stunt. Didn't realize." He shook his head, the stiffness in his spine easing as remorse seeped through. "I've been that kid," he said, more to himself than to the guard. "Back when I was squat and skinny, sneaking on stage. I remember the rush, but I also remember how it felt when I got booted off for it." The guard studied him for a moment, then nodded. "What would you like me to do, sir?" Elvis stumbled on his own answer. He swallowed, smoothed his jumpsuit's collar, and looked up with a new resolve. "Find Mr. Osbourne. Tell him I want to speak with him. Alone. Tonight." Across the strip, in a dim corner of the same hotel complex, Ozzy Osbourne sat slumped on a threadbare sofa in his dressing room, head in his hands. The muffled roar of departing fans drifted through the walls like a distant storm. His bandmates lounged around him, passing around a flask and trading incredulous glances. "So, you really did try to crash Presley's show?" Geezer Butler asked, voice half amused, half concerned. "I thought it was some urban legend the roadies spun." Ozzy lifted his head, eyes red-rimmed. "I believed the invite was real. Reg said Presley wanted to see what we were about." He waved a hand across the room, as if sweeping away the haze of shame. "I thought I was paying my respects. Instead, I got told to get the hell off the stage." One of the roadies flicked a flashlight on and off. "Word is, he's looking for you now. Wants to talk, apparently. Guess the king's got some manners after all." Ozzy's chest tightened. "He's got every right to hate my guts," he muttered. "I made a fool of myself in front of thousands." Across the hotel, Elvis paced a plush suite, far removed from the neon glare of the showroom. He smoothed a whiskey glass in his hand, the amber liquid catching the low lamplight. The memory of Ozzy's wild eyes haunted him, a mix of awe and panic that still smelled of adrenalized metal and too much hairspray. He set the glass down and pressed the button on the intercom. "Security," he said, voice unwavering. "Tell Mr. Osbourne I'll see him in the back lounge. And bring coffee." 20 minutes later, Ozzy tiptoed down a quiet hallway, heart pounding so loud he could hardly hear the carpet muffling his footsteps. The door to the back lounge stood ajar, a sliver of golden light beckoning. He paused, bracing himself, recalling the king's cool words. "You don't crash my stage." With a deep breath, Ozzy pushed open the door and slipped inside. Elvis rose from an armchair at the far end, his silhouette regal against the softly lit room. He gestured to a chair opposite him. "Have a seat," he said. His voice retained that same cadence, velvet, underpinned by steel. Ozzy perched on the edge of the chair, boots planted firmly, waiting for the blow to land. Instead, Presley leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I wasn't angry at you," he began, gaze steady. "I was startled. I've built a life on being in control of every inch of that stage. When you showed up, it felt like chaos. But I've been that kid too. When I stepped up in '56 without an invite, and they all threw me out." Ozzy exhaled, relief and remorse flickering across his face. "I'm sorry, Mr. Presley," he said, voice rough. "I didn't mean to disrespect you." Elvis nodded once. "Call me Elvis. And you—" He paused, warming to the moment. "You've got something in your voice. It's raw. Pain, maybe, but it's real." Ozzy blinked, confusion and gratitude warring in his eyes. "I don't know what to say." Elvis reached out, clapping Ozzy's shoulder in a brotherly grip. "Just keep singing your truth. But next time, let's do it together." In that hush, glimmering with solidarity rather than spectacle, two icons from different eras found common ground. The storm had passed, leaving behind the reverberations of understanding. Outside, Las Vegas pulsed with neon life. Inside, Elvis and Ozzy sat in a moment of quiet kinship that neither press nor fans would ever fully comprehend. The fluorescent tubes in the Hilton's private rehearsal studio hissed to life as Ozzy Osbourne stepped across the threshold, heart hammering beneath his leather jacket. The corridor beyond had been a cacophony of muffled cheers and last calls from the showroom, but here, behind a heavy door marked "Artist Only," the air was cool and still. The faint scent of stale cigarette smoke lingered among the racks of guitars and the polished grand piano in the corner. Elvis Presley stood by the piano bench, sleeves rolled to the elbows of a crisp white shirt, fingers drumming a soft, irregular rhythm on the instrument's lid. Ozzy paused, chest tightening at the sight of his hero in this intimate setting. No sequins, no dancers, just a man and his instrument. He closed the door gently, then removed his sunglasses, fingers brushing his damp hair. Elvis glanced up, offered a small, knowing smile, and gestured to a second stool beside him. "Sit down, Ozzy," Elvis said, voice low and unamplified. "No suits tonight, just music." Ozzy sank onto the stool, tension rippling through his shoulders. The grand piano's gleam reflected his own wide-eyed astonishment. He'd expected a scolding, a curt dismissal. Instead, he found an invitation. He nodded, swallowed, and watched as Elvis lifted a songbook from the piano bench, a worn volume of standards and gospel hymns bound in cracked leather. "I thought we'd start light," Elvis said, flipping to a page marked Blue Moon. His fingertips traced the title with reverence. "This one's been my solace more times than I can count. You know it?" Ozzy's throat went dry. "Yeah, one of my mom's favorites." He managed a small smile, voice husky with awe. "Can't say I've ever tried it on piano." Elvis slid onto the bench, posture relaxed, yet dignified. "Then, let's learn it together." He placed his right hand on the keys, summoned a gentle arpeggio, and nodded at Ozzy. "You sing the first verse. I'll harmonize. No pressure." The hush that followed was electric. Ozzy inhaled, feeling the weight of the moment settle in his bones. He straightened, closed his eyes briefly, then lifted his voice, a scratchy tenor softened by sincerity. "Blue moon, you saw me standing alone." Each note trembled with Ozzy's youthful rawness, a far cry from Sabbath's thunderous roar. Elvis's voice, warm and steady, wove into the second line as if it had been born to complement Ozzy's rough edge. "Without a dream in my heart, without a love of my own." They played through the verse in silent communion, the worn keys echoing Ozzy's unpracticed cadence and Elvis's seasoned timbre. Halfway through, Ozzy's confidence grew. He lifted his head and met Presley's gaze, finding nothing but encouragement. Elvis's fingers roamed the ivory, crafting gentle counter-melodies that cradled Ozzy's fragile entrance. At the chorus, Ozzy's voice soared. "Blue moon, you knew just what I was there for." Elvis's harmony joined like a balm, smoothing the rough edges and bathing each syllable in a golden glow. When the final note dissolved into the quiet, Ozzy exhaled in relief, pulse racing with exhilaration. Elvis leaned back, eyes glinting with approval. "That was honest, kid. That's what music's about. Bearing your soul, not blasting the roof off." Ozzy dabbed at his brow. "I never thought I'd sing like that in front of you. I mean, I got thrown off your stage." Elvis's smile softened. He set aside the songbook and turned serious. "A stage is just boards and lights. The real stage is in your heart. You stepped on mine, sure, but you also reminded me of when I was just a kid, hungry to be heard. I've done my share of storms and fame. Tell me, what made you want to crash that stage?" The question hung between them with surprising gravity. Ozzy swallowed, voice barely above a whisper. "I grew up in Birmingham. Dad drank most nights. Music was my escape. Sabbath taught me I could scream my pain instead of swallowing it. When I heard you singing gospel as a boy, I felt that same pull. That music can save you." Elvis nodded, gaze distant. "I sang in church before I ever knew stage lights. Gospel taught me that pain and hope live side by side. You've got that in your voice. It's not about spectacle, it's about truth." Ozzy felt tears prick in his eyes, a tide of emotions he'd kept locked away. "I'm sorry I disrespected you. I was clumsy in my admiration." Elvis rose and crossed the room in a few signal steps. He placed his hand on Ozzy's shoulder, firm yet gentle. "You're forgiven." but let's not wait until someone's shouting for an apology. Next time, just walk in through the front door and ask to sit in the back row. They shared a quiet laugh. Two icons, bound by music's unspoken code. Elvis retrieved a medium-sized brass key from his pocket. Here, this opens the side door to the showroom. I want you to have it. Next time, come watch safely. Ozzy took the key with reverence, feeling its weight as a symbol of trust. Thank you, man. I'll never crash again. Elvis patted his back. Good. Now, let's play the next song. Something from your world. He winked. Teach me a riff. Ozzy's grin was radiant. He snatched a dusty Fender Strat from the rack and handed it to Elvis. The king of rock and roll stretched his fingers over the frets, and in the hush of that private studio, the first bars of Sabbath's doom-laden harmony rose, a bridge across genres and generations. In that moment, mistakes were forgiven, and two musicians stood on common ground, each shaping the other's legacy in the sound of honest notes shared in the dark. Elvis Presley leaned back in the plush armchair of his Hilton hotel suite, the ivory phone cradled in his hand. Smoke from a fading cigar curled toward the ornate ceiling, and on the low table before him sat two untouched cocktails. The aftermath of last night's unexpected meeting with Ozzy Osbourne still pulsed through his veins. He had offered the young metal singer a rare olive branch, and now he intended to follow it with something far more daring. He lifted the receiver and pressed it to his ear. The line crackled, then clicked into life. Ozzy? Elvis's voice sounded warmer than the Las Vegas sun at high noon. Yeah? Ozzy's weary drawl emerged from the other end. He was holed up in his own hotel room down the strip, surrounded by empty beer bottles and discarded tour flyers. The confrontation backstage had left him rattled, and eager for any chance to set things right. Elvis here, came the reply. I've been thinking. Elvis paused, letting Ozzy absorb the familiar drawl. Tomorrow night's show. How would you feel about joining me? Not as a guest. You and I, side by side. Your voice, my stage. We make it a duet. Silence crackled through the line. Ozzy frowned, fingers twined around the receiver. You want me to sing with you? On stage? Together? Elvis chuckled softly. Image is what you wear, kid. Music's what you leave behind. Let's leave something they'll talk about long after the lights go down. Ozzy's pulse spiked. The invitation shimmered in his mind like a promise. Yet before he could answer, a sharper voice broke in. Elvis, you can't be serious, interrupted his manager, Reggie Thompson, who had evidently been patched into the phone conference. Your fans expect a polished show, full orchestra, backup singers. Ozzy's a screaming frontman, not a duet partner. The PR fallout. Elvis raised a hand to hush him, gesturing for discretion even though Reg couldn't see. Reg, music's not a boardroom pitch. It's an act of truth. And truth sometimes demands risk. He glanced at the quartets of empty chairs arranged for VIPs in tomorrow's show. Let's give them something real. Reg sighed heavily. All right, but include my share of the line items, will you? We'll need extra rehearsal, extra sound checks. Elvis cut him off, smiling to himself. Tell them to clear their schedules. We'll make it fit. He pressed the receiver to his ear again. Ozzy. How about it? Ozzy stared at the silent telephone, the weight of the proposition settling in his gut. He thought of his bandmates, already muttering about being upstaged by a velvet trucker. He remembered the sting of embarrassment from crashing Elvis's show. Joining him now would be an even greater gamble. Elvis, he finally said, voice low. I need to think. Take your time, Elvis replied gently. But the slot will go dark if you don't show. Midnight call time. Ozzy hung up and sank onto the edge of his rumpled bed. Reg paced the room, shaking his head at his reflection in the window. "This is crazy," Reg muttered. "You'll derail the whole tour." Ozzy rubbed his temples. The invitation gnawed at him, terrifying and thrilling all at once. He grabbed his phone again and dialed Black Sabbath's dressing room line. The familiar shuffle of amps and equipment greeted him. Then the voice of Tony Iommi. "Oz, what's up?" "I need your take," Ozzy said, voice weary. "Elvis invited me on stage tomorrow night, as his partner." Silence crackled on the line. Geezer Butler finally spoke, incredulous. "You're kidding. The king of rock and roll wants you? On his turf? Man, that's either a masterstroke or a funeral." "I don't know which," Ozzy admitted. "My gut says it could change everything, for better or worse." Bill Ward's drumsticks tapped a staccato beat from somewhere out of frame. "We'll support whatever you decide," Tony said gravely. "But know this, if you go up there, you do your thing. Don't swallow yourself." Ozzy nodded to himself, drawing strength from their loyalty. He ended the call and dialed Elvis's number without hesitation. The phone rang twice. "Elvis!" His voice was firm this time. "You've decided?" came the reply, bright against the stillness. "Yeah," Ozzy said. "I'll sing your truth. Where do you want me?" Elvis's laugh was like warm sunshine. "Meet me at the side door at 10 tomorrow night. We go on at 11. I'll have my guitar, and you bring yours." The next evening, the Hilton showroom thrummed with anticipation. Ushers guided a sea of tuxedos and evening gowns to their seats under the twinkling chandeliers. The house orchestra tuned in plush booths. Stagehands scurried to complete final checks on painted backdrops and microphone stands. Whispered rumors fluttered through the crowd. "Elvis has a surprise guest. They say it's a heavy metal singer. Can you imagine?" In the wings, Ozzy adjusted his studded wristbands and gulped cool water. His Gibson Explorer rested in its stand beside him. From beneath the curtain came the first strains of the overture to American Trilogy. The audience rose in unified applause. Elvis strode on stage alone, tossing his jacket to an attendant and raising one manicured finger in greeting. Elvis cleared his throat and launched into the triumphant medley. "Dixieland," "All My Trials," and "Battle Hymn." The crowd roared with every shift in tempo, every roll of the snare drums. As he reached the triumphant finale, he extended his hand toward the downstage side wing. Ozzy stepped forward into the spotlight, black leather and anguish lithe beneath the glare. The showroom fell into a breath held collectively, a tight silence rippling over thousands of faces. For a heartbeat, Ozzy felt the crash of all his doubts, the trembling fear that he'd be swallowed alive by the king's realm. Then, Elvis lifted his own mic and spoke, voice echoing cleanly. "Ladies and gentlemen, here tonight is a man who sings the darkness and shows us there's hope inside it. I present to you Ozzy Osbourne." The roar that followed shook the chamber. Ozzy's chest roared with it, adrenaline surging to his fingertips as he met Presley's gaze. Neither man flinched. Elvis nodded, cueing the orchestra to fall silent. The softest piano notes fluttered from Elvis's stand, an intricate, nostalgic pattern he'd played on his first Vegas show. Ozzy leaned into his mic, voice quiet but unwavering. "In the ghetto, the little baby child." His words trembled with empathy, a melodic tremor bridging divide between wealth and want. Elvis joined him on the next line, voice rich and assured, "Is born in the ghetto." Together, they sang, Ozzy's raw edge blending with Presley's seasoned warmth, underpinned by the orchestra's aching strings. The crowd, rapt and still, listened not as fragmented factions, but as one body, moved by the unlikely harmony. By the final chorus, tears shimmered in Ozzy's eyes. Presley reached over, resting a reassuring hand on Ozzy's shoulder. The king's presence was a steadying anchor. Ozzy's voice, a gale of truth, was the wind driving them onward. When the last note died, the audience erupted into a standing ovation that felt almost reverent. As the applause thundered through the showroom, Elvis leaned into the mic once more. "Tonight, we proved that music knows no boundaries, only hearts that are brave enough to share it." Ozzy closed his eyes, breath coming in ragged gasps. The tumult around him was his triumph, a gift he and Elvis had crafted together, forged in honesty rather than spectacle. Behind the curtain, Ozzy and Elvis embraced in silence, the cavernous applause a backdrop to a kinship that would echo far beyond the gilded walls of the Hilton. And in that moment, they both understood that this one courageous duet would outlast every headline, every tour, and every stage they would ever know. The lights in the Hilton showroom dimmed to a soft gold glow, settling over rows of expectant faces. It was late October 1976, and the air pulsed with the promise of something unprecedented. Elvis Presley, white jumpsuit catching every stray shaft of light, strode to center stage, arms wide as the audience erupted into cheers. He launched into the opening bars of Burning Love, each note rolling like distant thunder through the cavernous room. Yet beneath the fireworks of color and sound lay an undercurrent of anticipation. Somewhere in the wings, Ozzy Osbourne waited. Minutes earlier, backstage had been charged with nervous energy. Crew members whispered about the king's secret plans, and handlers darted eyes toward the side door, where a single microphone stand had been set deliberately off to one side. Ozzy, clad in leather and studs, paced in the shadows, throat tight and heart pounding. He clutched his own mic as though it were a lifeline. Reg Thompson hovered behind him, adjusting the cords with trembling fingers. "Remember," Reg murmured, "he asked for you by name. Just walk out like you belong. Then sing your part." Ozzy nodded, though doubts gnawed at him. Only hours before, he'd been thrown from Elvis's stage like an interloper. Tonight, though, he was not invading a territory. He was fulfilling an invitation. He inhaled deeply, steeling himself. As Elvis closed Burning Love, the room buzzed, but did not fade into applause. Instead, the king held up two fingers as a silent signal, and the band flowed seamlessly into the gentle opening chords of In the Ghetto. A hush fell, heavy with curiosity. Why choose such a mournful song this late in the set? Why this note of empathy? At that precise moment, Ozzy stepped into view. Spotlights found him, throwing his black silhouette into relief against the shimmering gold curtain. His entrance was so sudden that several audience members gasped. The hush deepened into charged silence. Ozzy made his way down the shallow stairs, each step measured, until he stood shoulder to shoulder with Presley. Elvis turned, offering a nod of reassurance. At his signal, the band quietly receded to the rhythm track, leaving only a spare acoustic guitar and the bare essentials. Ozzy raised his mic, voice wavering as the first verse beckoned. "As the snow flies on a cold and gray Chicago mornin'." His tone was hushed, more confessional than the booming style he used with Sabbath, but rich with emotion. The crowd listened rapt, leaning forward as Ozzy poured out the narrative of poverty and the cycle of despair. When he reached the lyric about the newborn child crying in the ghetto, his voice cracked, a fragile tremor betraying the intensity of his empathy. Without missing a beat, Presley slid his mic closer and added the second verse in his smooth, resonant timbre. "Good morning, America. How are you?" The juxtaposition was startling. Ozzy's raw edge meeting Elvis's seasoned warmth. Their voices intertwined, weaving a tapestry of sorrow and hope. During the third verse, however, Ozzy's throat constricted. By the bridge, his vocal cords rebelled against the strain. He faltered on the line, "Poor little you." A ragged rasp cut the line short. Ozzy's shoulders trembled. The microphone swayed in his hand as uncertainty flickered across his face. For the first time in his career, the artist on stage was unmistakably vulnerable. Presley, sensing the moment's gravity, laid a steady hand on Ozzy's shoulder. The simple gesture spoke volumes. Solidarity, compassion, the passing of a silent torch. Presley then leaned to his own mic and sang the remaining lines solo, infusing each word with a gentle reassurance that carried through the hushed auditorium. "Never knew that life could be so hard. The ghetto is a dream, a terrible dream. Oh." By the time Presley reached the final refrain, the audience was on its feet. Not out of obligation, but moved by the joint confession of pain and possibility. When he finally let the last note hang, an unbridled wave of applause thundered through the room, drowning out even the subtle echoes of the vanished microphone. Elvis stepped toward Ozzy, lifting his hand in a gracious arch. As the ovations swelled around them, Presley addressed the crowd in his warm, gravelly baritone. "Friends, tonight we shared a moment beyond rock and roll. We sang truth together, and I thank my brother at my side for his heart. This is why we sing." Ozzy could barely muster a nod, his voice gone, but his soul undeniably renewed. Tears stung his eyes as the applause washed over him, a benediction born of unity rather than spectacle. Backstage, the world felt different. The velvet panels and gilded trim of the hallway seemed to shimmer with afterglow. Ozzy leaned against the wall, heart still racing, as crew members buzzed with uncontainable excitement. Reg placed a hand on his shoulder, eyes bright. "You did it," he breathed. "You owned it." Ozzy closed his eyes and exhaled, remembering the shock of losing control, only to find something far richer in its place. In that electric night, two men had bridged a chasm between genres, generations, and hearts, leaving behind a story that would reverberate long after the final note faded. Tonight was not merely a duet. It was a declaration that true music, raw, honest, unguarded, could transcend every boundary and remind us all why we sing. A week had passed since that electric night in Las Vegas, and Ozzy Osbourne found himself back in the quiet gloom of his London hotel room. The city outside was shrouded in drizzle, pale street lamps flickering through condensed windows. Sabbath's tour schedule pressed on without pause, sound checks, radio spots, midnight flights. But on this rainy November evening, Ozzy lingered alone, the events of that fusion of rock and roll and metal still pulsing in his veins. He cradled a tumbler of single malt scotch in one hand, amber liquid catching the glow of the lone desk lamp. The room smelled of damp carpet and stale cigarette smoke from the previous occupant, an atmosphere not unlike the backstage haze he'd left behind. An envelope lay on the narrow writing desk, propped against a leather-bound tour diary. No return address, no stamp, just his name, scrawled in a familiar slanted hand he had only come to know that singular night. Heart thudding, Ozzy tore it open. His fingers trembled as he eased out a single sheet of stationery, the paper as pale as autumn moonlight. On top, in blue ink, he recognized the looping signature, E.P. He set the scotch aside and unfolded the page. The cramped lines of Presley's penmanship at once elegant and unpolished, crisscrossed the sheet. Ozzy, last night was more than a show. It was a reminder of why we stand on stage. I saw in you the same spark that lit me up decades ago, a hunger to be heard, to let pain transform into something alive. I struggled for years under sequins and spotlights, feeling every lonely mile of fame. Tonight, with your voice beside mine, I felt something real again. We both play on that razor's edge, balancing on desire and dread. Keep that flame alive, brother. When you're gone, I want them to remember that you weren't just noise, but truth. Elvis. Ozzy's breath hitched as the words sank in. Each sentence seemed to echo through the room, stirring ghosts of his own past. A Birmingham boy yearning to escape his father's bar fights, searching for salvation in Sabbath's crushing riffs. He could taste the faint sweetness of hope that glowed in Presley's confession. Two men from opposite ends of the same spectrum, connected by the raw honesty of their voices. He pressed the page to his chest, closing his eyes against the swirl of emotion. A single tear tracked down his cheek, splashing onto the inked words. In the hush that followed, the patter of rain on the windowpane sounded like applause from unseen spectators, urging him to carry on. Minutes stretched into an hour as Ozzy reread the letter, tracing Elvis's elegant loops with a fingertip. He savored every line, the admission of his own insecurities, the bond forged in that shared spotlight, the desire that their joint moment be remembered as something deeper than mere spectacle. Finally, he folded the letter with reverence and slid it into the inner pocket of his leather jacket. He retrieved his tour diary, opened it to a blank page, and scrawled a single line. Keep singing for the heart, not the crowd. He poured the remaining scotch into the sink and flicked off the lamp, leaving only the muted glow of the city beyond the glass. As he sank onto the bed, jacket and letter beside him, he felt a quiet certainty settle in his chest. Elvis's words would be his lodestar through every guttural scream and every midnight whisper of melody yet to come. And there, in that small room above London's rain-slick streets, Ozzy Osbourne drifted to sleep with a promise held close, a promise born of two icons daring to share their truth on a single, unforgettable stage. Ozzy Osbourne awoke before dawn on August 16, 1977, to the sterile buzz of the hotel TV tuned to the British Evening Bulletin. He lay in bed, tangled in a threadbare blanket, ears still ringing from the previous night's encore of War Pigs. Black Sabbath's tour had rolled through Manchester earlier that evening, and his body had been pushed to its physical limits. Now, bleary-eyed, he pressed the remote against the rumpled mattress and hit play. The newscaster's voice was unusually solemn. We interrupt this program to bring you the sad news that Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, has died at his Graceland home in Memphis. The words landed like a fist to Ozzy's gut. He bolted upright, heart hammering, blood roaring in his ears. The screen blurred as the announcement finished and rolled into a montage of Presley's career highlights, the swiveling hips, the white jumpsuits, the gospel moments. Ozzy stumbled to the edge of the bed, blanket pooled around his hips. His throat tightened, breath hiccuped. He remembered the letter, Elvis's last written words of encouragement, folded into his leather jacket back in London, the ink still smudged on his fingertips. Now that Presley was gone, those words felt both precious and painfully final. He fumbled for his Vietnam fatigues hanging over the chair, yanked them on, and grabbed the hotel room phone. Hands shaking, he dialed Reg Thompson's number. "Reg? It's me," Ozzy croaked, voice raspy as if he'd screamed it on stage. Reg's groggy voice answered, "Oz, what's happened? Did you hear?" "Elvis is dead," Ozzy interrupted. disbelief and grief warring in his tone. "He's really gone." There was a long, stunned silence. Then Reg's voice softened. "I'm so sorry, mate. I don't know what to say." Ozzy pressed the phone to his chest, eyes stinging. "I need—" He swallowed hard. "I need to read his letter again." Reg paused. "Letter? Oz? You mean the note he sent you? I thought—" "That's the one." Ozzy's voice cracked. "And I need my guitar. Now." He hung up, grabbed his black Les Paul replica, and staggered to the window overlooking Manchester's damp streets. The morning sky was a sullen gray, matching the ache in his chest. He unzipped his jacket and drew out the cream-colored stationery, the words EP looping across the top. He let the letter fall open on the bedspread and sank to his knees, face inches from the paper. "Ozzy, last night was more than a show. It was a reminder of why we stand on stage. I saw in you the same spark that lit me up decades ago, a hunger to be heard, to let pain transform into something alive. I struggled for years under sequins and spotlights, feeling every lonely mile of fame. Tonight, with your voice beside mine, I felt something real again. We both play on that razor's edge, balancing on desire and dread. Keep that flame alive, brother. When you're gone, I want them to remember that you weren't just noise, but truth." Elvis. Ozzy's breath caught. The words blurred as tears rolled down his cheeks. He pressed his forehead against the satin bedsheet, trembling. Elvis had seen depth in his voice, had shared his own vulnerabilities. And now he was gone forever. Sometime later, Sabbath's tour bus lumbered toward Birmingham. Inside, the band's mood was subdued. Ozzy sat hunched at the rear lounge, running his fingers over the facsimile of Elvis's medallion that Presley had pressed into his hand in Memphis. Geezer Butler, Tony Iommi, Bill Ward, and Reg lingered near him, their expressions awkward with uncertainty. Finally, Ozzy cleared his throat. "There's something I need to tell you lot." His voice was quiet, raw. "Last year in Vegas, I sang with Elvis, and he sent me that letter, and now he's gone." Tony's eyes widened. "You sang with him? On stage?" Ozzy nodded, lifting the letter out of his jacket pocket. "Yeah, and he wrote me this. It was the last thing he ever wrote." He passed the letter around the table. The men read it in stunned silence, heads bowed over the thick paper. Reg's brow furrowed. "Are you sure this is real? Because if you're pulling our leg—" Ozzy looked up, eyes blazing. "I wouldn't joke about this. I swear, it's true." He handed the letter to Tony, then to Geezer, then to Bill. Each of them read the same words, their hands shaking slightly. Bill Ward finally looked up. "Christ, I never believed it. Glenn, it's real." E.P. Geezer's voice was hushed. "We all heard about a crashed stage in Vegas, but we thought it was a myth." Ozzy reached into his satchel and pulled out the small brass key Elvis had given him. He placed it on the table. "And this," he said, voice thick, "is from Graceland. The chapel door. He said it was mine." Reg's jaw dropped. How did he—" Ozzy's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "We sat in a little chapel in Memphis. He played gospel hymns. Then he gave me this key and said, 'When you need to remember why you sing, come back here.'" The tour bus was still rocking gently as the band absorbed the gravity of his words. They glanced at Ozzy with a new respect, hushed reverence. No one questioned him further. Some truths, once revealed, required no proof. Ozzy folded the letter with trembling hands and tucked it back into his jacket. The men around him fell silent, each lost in their own reflections. The engine's thrum beneath them felt like a heartbeat, steady, inexorable, alive. Ozzy pressed the key in his palm and vowed to silence himself about the duet for as long as it took. The story of that night was sacred, a private testament between him and the king, now passed into legend. And so he sat, shoulders shaking, but resolved, ready to carry Presley's final gift forward, with every note he sang, every scream he unleashed, knowing that the flame Elvis had ignited would burn in his voice long after the final curtain fell. By the spring of 1997, Ozzy Osbourne's voice had settled into a whiskey-worn baritone that bore the scars of a lifetime on the road. He sat in a softly lit London television studio, its walls draped in deep burgundy velvet. A single camera rolled on him and his interviewer, Claire Hastings, a poised but curious documentarian assembling a retrospective on the life and legend of Elvis Presley. Claire leaned forward, fingers folded around her notepad. "Ozzy," she began, her tone respectful but insistent, "you've hinted at a secret collaboration with Elvis Presley back in '76. Tonight, I'd like to know, did you actually sing with the King of Rock and Roll in Las Vegas?" Silence stretched like a held breath. Ozzy's eyes flickered to the studio's back wall, a memorial collage of Presley photos, and back to Claire. He cleared his throat, the rich gravel of his voice filling the intimate space. "Yeah," he said simply. "I did." The audience, small, made up of music historians and a handful of invited fans, leaned forward. Claire's pen hovered above the pad. "Would you tell us how it happened? So many believe it's just a legend." Ozzy nodded slowly. "I'll tell you, but it's not a story of gimmicks or staged stunts. It's about two fellas who found the same spark in their souls." He reached to his side and lifted a faded envelope from a wooden side table. It bore no stamp, no printed return address, only a looping EP in blue ink. Claire's breath caught as Ozzy slid open the envelope and withdrew a single sheet of cream stationery. He unfolded it gently and held it at the edges with both hands, as though cradling something fragile. The studio lights glinted off the silver cross he always wore, given to him by Presley himself in a Memphis chapel long ago. He cleared his throat and began to read aloud, voice resonant and lyrical. "Ozzy, last night was more than a show. It was a reminder of why we stand on stage. I saw in you the same spark that lit me up decades ago, a hunger to be heard, to let pain transform into something alive. I struggled for years under sequins and spotlights, feeling every lonely mile of fame. Tonight, with your voice beside mine, I felt something real again. We both play on that razor's edge, balancing on desire and dread. Keep that flame alive, brother. When you're gone, I want them to remember that you weren't just noise, but truth. Elvis." As each line tumbled into the hush, Ozzy's eyes glistened. The studio cameras closed in on his weathered face, the furrowed brow, the lines etched by decades of exhilaration and excess. When he finished, the only sound was the soft intake of breath from the audience. Claire's voice was hushed. "That is incredible. And you've kept it secret all these years?" Ozzy slipped the letter back into its envelope. "Some things are meant for the heart, not the tabloids. But tonight, I'll share it so the world knows the real price of music, the courage to show your wounds instead of hiding them." A ripple of emotion spread through the room. Claire nodded, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Ozzy." Weeks later, the interview aired across networks and was rebroadcast on music channels. Viewers worldwide saw Ozzy Osbourne, once synonymous with heavy metal mayhem, reveal his most cherished testament to Presley's humanity. The letter excerpt and Ozzy's voice reading it became a hushed anthem among musicians, a manifesto of integrity over image. In the months that followed, fans organized gatherings in small venues, passing around photocopies of the letter, playing bootleg recordings of the fateful Vegas duet, and lighting candles in remembrance of the king. Music shops displayed framed reproductions of Presley's note, with margins scrawled by dedicated fans copying his handwritten loops. On a crisp autumn evening in 1997, Ozzy took to the stage at Birmingham's Symphony Hall. No band, no pyrotechnics, just a lone stool, a single microphone, and an upright piano. Thousands of fans filled the grand auditorium, transfixed by the simplicity of the setup. A single spotlight illuminated Ozzy's silver-streaked hair and worn leather jacket. He leaned forward, voice gentle as a whisper. "This song. I learned it from a man who taught me that truth is the highest stage. I want to sing it for him, and for everyone who ever needed to feel they weren't alone." He placed his fingers on the piano keys, the first chords of "In the Ghetto," echoing soft and low. As the snow flies on a cold and gray Chicago mornin'. Ozzy's baritone, no longer a snarling roar but a vessel of introspection, carried the narrative of hardship and hope. Each word resonated fully, unadorned, weaving a tapestry of empathy. The hall was utterly silent. No coughs, no rustling programs, only the sound of a single voice bearing witness. When he reached the bridge, he paused, eyes closed, remembering Elvis's hand on his shoulder, and the medallion pressed into his palm. The final notes lingered, and for a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then the audience rose as one, the standing ovation rolling across the seats like a tidal wave. Ozzy offered a small, grateful nod and spoke into the mic with a solemn softness. Tonight wasn't my solo. It was his gift to all of us, to keep singing even when the world feels cold and lonely. He rose from the stool and stepped back into the shadows, leaving the stage to the echo of that truth. Outside, under the autumn stars, fans filed into the night, carrying a new understanding. That the greatest legacy two kings could leave was not a catalogue of hits, but the courage to bare their souls and to inspire others to do the same.